Alright, today I'm going to be doing a hack on a Panasonic FH22. This camera was sent to me by Daryl Bouvier. Goes by Buck66 on the forums. It's a 14 megapixel camera, and I haven't determined yet how fast this camera is, but I'll do that whenever I connect it to a control board. So to start our hack, we need to remove the two screws that are on the wrist strap side of the case. There's 3 under the bottom close to the tripod mounting hole, and there's one on this left hand side. So we'll go ahead and start by removing all the screws. And as always, you need to keep your screws in order so you can put those back where they originally came from. And once you get those two screws out of that side, you can pop that trim piece off on that side. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Get the 3 down here by the tripod and mounting hole. You'll notice these screws are black compared to the ones that are on the right and left hand side, which are silver. Alright, go ahead and take this trim piece off. Adjust my camera just a little bit here. Alright, now to get our front and back covers off, there's one screw up here toward the top right corner. We need to remove it. Alright, now we can take our front and back covers off. Just pop it loose at the bottom, pull it out toward the top and take that off. Same way with the front cover, just work it out at the bottom, then you can work it loose at the top. A little easier said than done sometimes. There. Alright, now to get to our power and shutter board up top, it's like most of the Panasonics. Just get in this right hand corner and pop that up, and it'll disconnect this block connector, and then you can lift that whole assembly out. And at this point, I would suggest, if you have had the camera powered up at all recently, that you need to discharge the capacitor for the flash, and I'll show you where to do that. Right here next to the capacitor, they'll see this pink wire. There's a couple of bare copper spots on that green board down there. Either one of those could be used as the positive, or they do carry the positive voltage from this capacitor, and then the bare section of the capacitor itself is going to be ground, or the negative side. So take your discharge resistor and touch it to the bare section of the capacitor, and either of those bare copper pads that I told you about, and hold it there for a few seconds, and that will discharge your capacitor. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to try to tape this board down in place just so it doesn't move around so much on me. Like I said, you want to be very careful touching anything in here though until you get that capacitor discharged, because you don't want to get shocked and you don't want to short your board out. So, touching one of those bare spots, and I know this capacitor is already discharged, but I'm going to just do that anyway, just as a precautionary step. Alright. And you can also verify that the voltage has been drained off of it simply by using a voltage meter set for high DC voltage and check it and see if there's any remaining voltage there before you continue. Alright, now our hack locations for this camera, pretty straightforward like a lot of Panasonics. For your externals, in this configuration, this tab is going to be battery negative, and the one to the far right is battery positive. And just make a little solder pad down at the base next to the green board on each of those pins, and then you can solder your wires on there. Alright, so I'm just going to take a small amount of soldering flux, solder paste, whatever you want to call it, and put just a small amount at the base of each of those pins. And then you can put a small amount of solder at each of those locations. Tilt you down a little bit here. You want to be careful that you don't melt that connecting block. Alright, so I've got the negative side. It's always harder for me to get this stuff done on camera than it is off. Alright, so I've got my solder in there. See if you can see that. And then you can solder your wires on. Alright, so now that I've got my external wire soldered on, what I'm going to do with those is I'm going to run them toward the right side here, and right behind this little component, and then I'll glue those down in place, and then I'm going to exit them this direction. You'll notice two little notches in this green board, and that makes a nice place to have those wires come through. So I'm going to do that. Now on the other side of the board, our solder locations that we need in order to do the hack. For your power switch, your on and off switch, right behind it you'll notice the three little lugs. And the one to the left is going to be for power common. One to the far right is for power. Now, put you a little bit of soldering paste on each of those, and a small amount of solder, and that'll make it a lot easier to get your wire soldered on. And for our shutter button, which is here, the bottom left contact, get in here, the bottom left corner is what we're going to need to solder to for our shutter wire. Okay, right here. Alright, and same thing there. Put you a little bit of solder paste, and then a little solder there. Makes a little solder pad. It's easier to get your wire to solder to. And pre-tin your wires. Keep the exposed section of your wires very short. That way you don't run a risk of bridging something that you don't want to. On this shutter button, when you solder that wire on, make sure your solder does not wick up and get on to the metal that's over the shutter button, and that your wire doesn't touch that either when you solder it on, because if it does, then you're going to have a short and the shutter button won't work. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and get these wires soldered on, and then I'll come back. Alright, so now I've got all my wires soldered on. You can see I have my power common and power soldered on to the on-off switch, and the shutter button onto the shutter. And I run all of those wires through this little slit in the green board, so I can have them on the back side, and then I'll glue those down in place on the power common, and the shutter wire, I ran them over towards the left hand side. There's a couple of little indentions in the board over there. I ran them toward that location, and then with the externals for the batteries, I ran those just behind the black block, keeping them away from where this connector would fit into the main board on the back, and glued them down in place over here, and then routed them toward the two little indentions on the board here. So now that I've got those in place, we can go ahead and put this power and shutter board back on. Get all that in place, and then you can reinstall your screws for that. Get that one back in, and now we can reinstall this onto our camera body. Well, actually, I shouldn't have put that back on yet, because I need to route my wires. What I'm going to do is I'm going to route my wires across this direction and down through this corner and out the bottom here. And I snipped off just a little piece of this plastic here, and then on this trim piece that goes on that corner, I just trimmed off a little corner there, and that will allow my wires to exit out of the camera. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we'll come back and check our hack. Alright, just so you can see how I have my wires running out, I got my board back on up here, but right along this gray section, let me see if I can get something to point to a little better. Right here where I have the screwdriver, there and over here, there's just a little small section of plastic that I trimmed off there. It's just a little extension that stuck out some, and I trimmed that off just so it would make it easier to tuck these wires down in between that plastic and the back of the LCD bracket without damaging the wires. And of course, I've got them ran out this bottom corner like I told you I was going to do, and so I'm going to go ahead and get the camera back together. Alright guys, so I've got the camera back together, got the wires exited out the bottom corner. Let me turn my overhead light back on. Alright, so now we're going to check the hack as far as our power button and shutter button. So we'll take our power and power common, and of course we have to tie those together on this camera since it has the slide switch. So now the camera is on, and take our shutter button and touch that to those two, and we take a photo. And once again, alright, disconnect the power common, and the camera power's off. Alright guys, so that's the hack on the Panasonic FH22's 14 megapixel camera, and I hope this helps. Thanks for watching.